So there was a video released by the pretty well-known community figure xSkull titled The Top 4 Best Cats. I think the title does a pretty good job at explaining what is talked about there, and honestly, it's a very well-worded video of what xSkull believes to be the best of the best. However, ever since the video's release, one specific placement has been lingering in my mind, and that is what they chose for the #1 slot, that being Boulder Cat. Now, before I continue this video, I just want to say that this video isn't to harass xSkull over their opinion, nor is it to blatantly go and directly tell xSkull that you're wrong! Because that's not what I think. While I do disagree with them, I don't think that their opinion of Boulder Cat being the best cat is an invalid one, nor do I think it's some completely outrageous take. I can completely see why one would say that from a versatility standpoint, Boulder would rank among the best cats. However, I don't think versatility alone shows the whole picture. There's more to the puzzle, if you will. Because yes, Boulder can be an absolutely broken cat, and is definitely one of the most versatile units, but those come with some pretty big asterisks, and that is what I want to focus on. Join me as I ask the question, is Boulder Cat truly the best cat? Before we get into the grimy detail of everything, we need to introduce our candidate, Boulder Cat. What is Boulder Cat? I hear exactly two of you say. Well, Boulder Cat, first form rock cat, is a meat shield with a very unique property. It has an absurd amount of HP, virtually indestructible, but once Boulder hits its target, it will despawn after a second of sitting on the front line. This gives it the very unique property of being a temporary invincible wall that the enemies can't break through, and something which is great at stalling and preventing an enemy advance. And if an enemy can kill Boulder, you're in big trouble. I don't think it needs to be stated how broken this kind of ability can be. It has an absurd amount of potential. Stalling, baiting attacks, and having most immunities are among some of its biggest strengths, and it's no surprise that people mention Boulder amongst one of the best cats. But you're not here to hear me talk about them and say why they're so broken. You're here for me to talk about those asterisks I mentioned earlier. So let's get to those. To start with the biggest of these asterisks, I have to focus on a mechanic which I'm sure you're quite familiar with, that being research combos. If you're not familiar with what a research combo does, it is one of the many types of cat combos in the game, which when using one will lower the cooldown on summoning a cat. I'm not going to go too much more into detail about these, so if you want a longer video about research combos, I'm going to suggest Lucas 4's video on the subject, but the one key thing is that unlike other combos which increase stats by a percentage, research combos lower the time by hard-coded values. They do have a limit of how low the cooldown can be, which is 2 seconds, but on units like Boulder and especially other meat shields, having a 2-second cooldown can be super useful. The reason people praise Boulder so much with this cooldown is that it decreases the time between which Boulder isn't on your front lines, because the more time that Boulder is on the front line, the less pushing the enemies can do. Now, this can be very broken under the right circumstances, but keep in mind that in order to use this absolutely broken version of Rock, you need to fill some slots of your lineup with a research combo. I'm gonna say that, on average, most players will fill 3 slots of their lineup when using research combos, and this is because 2 of the most popular research combos are Biohazard plus Bony Bone, also known as Bio Bone, or if you have Losphos, you'll use Bad Guys. Now, feel free to hate me for what I'm about to say, but as overpowered as research combos can be, they are not the end-all of strategy in the Battle Cats. In my experience of playing the game, you can't just use a research combo and expect it to work every time. I found that the stages which benefit the use of a research combo the most are stages which either have enemies that are focused on a single trait, so summoning a ton of the exact same meat shield who counters that trait prevents the enemies from having any chance of pushing, or the other scenario is for stages which have extremely hard pushing enemies, such as Lutrine Gokarako or Emost, where you need a lot of meat shields to hold them back. Now, Boulder would be great at countering both of these scenarios with that research combo, and on paper, that would make them a very useful asset. But that doesn't tell the whole story. Those 3 slots that you're using on a research combo can be detrimental when trying to form a strategy in order to counter everything in a stage. 3 out of 10 slots, while not an incredibly large amount, is still over a quarter of your lineup that you're using in order to boost your meat shields, and that may prevent you from being able to bring in enough attackers in order to counter key enemies in the stage. I know this may come off as me cherry-picking stages here, but these are the first ones that came to mind when thinking of stages where you need enough attackers to land the pain. The few that came to mind for me are Pasta Desert, Row Row, Gas-Powered Birds, Cursing the Cursor, and the Belated Priest. Most of these stages are ones where meat shields, regardless of number, will be constantly getting pummeled due to the sheer amount of damage the enemies are doing, and just how many there are. So what you'll often need is a lot of attackers in order to kill these enemies as quickly as possible. These problems also will only get worse on higher crown mags, as 3 crowns on each of these stages, for the lack of a better words, is a fucking nightmare to do. If you're not able to get in enough damage with your attackers, it is pretty easy to see a quick loss of these stages, and by using a research combo to boost Boulder and other meat shields, you may be losing critical slots needed to counter these enemies. There is also another prevalent issue when using research combos that often comes up, and that is money. Not an issue on every stage, but there are plenty of stages where using a research combo in combination with Boulder and whatever other meat shields are required puts a massive drain on your wallet, and in some cases completely cripples it. This is most often the case in stages with a lack of peons or ones where the enemies are super bulky and take forever to take down, and this can mean another fast track to you taking a fat L. Okay, so if research combos come with these liabilities in them when using Boulder, then what if instead of using a research combo to boost Boulder, you used another meat shield to assist Boulder, and help make them into such a great force? This is actually what I find myself doing more often than not, and in my opinion is usually a more reliable way to counter the enemies than using a research combo. There is one key meat shield who makes a great duo with Boulder who I want to specifically talk about, because these two together can be very good at countering a variety of stages, including many of the ones I just mentioned, and the meat shield in question is the one and only Jiangshi Cat. For those who need a refresher, Jiangshi is the true form of Pogo Cat, whose special gimmick as a meat shield is that instead of being a very bulky meat shield like the Erasers, is a somewhat frailer one with a survivability, meaning once all their HP is depleted, they will come back for one last shot before dying. The reason this is so special is that on stages like the ones I mentioned a minute ago, where the enemies will be pummeling most meat shields regardless of health in a microsecond, having a cat like Jiangshi on the team basically means that you get 2 meat shields for the price of 1. This has great synergy when you combine this with Boulder, as it makes it very hard for the enemies to push, and I think gets you way closer to having a defense which is stupid hard for the enemies to push against. Besides working great on the stages I just mentioned, one other set of stages that I find it working great in are the gauntlets. You know, everybody's favorite stages in the Battle Cats. It's not a solution for every gauntlet, and you'll often need another small meat shield to help hold the enemies back, but these two together do a substantial amount of the heavy lifting when it comes to meat shielding on these harder stages. However, as good as this is, I have one issue with what I'm saying. This feels less like me praising how good Boulder is, and more as to how good Boulder is in combination with Jiangshi. I mean, you need both meat shields together in order to create this defense that I'm describing. You can't have one without the other, and it makes it feel less like Boulder is doing all the work, and more like Boulder is fitting into the puzzle and doing their part specifically. The reason I think this is an issue when it comes to picking the best cats is because, I mean, look at the other candidates that xSkull picked out in this video. Each cat is one which can do so much on their own, or with barely any assistance at all. The first two to look at are Jelly Dumpling and Can. They both have devastating attacks which can cripple many different enemies with barely any assistance at all. Usually, to play it safe, especially with Jelly Dumpling, the most you'll ever need for either cat is a single meat shield just to absorb the enemy's attack before these two can go in and rein in the pain. And then you have Bahamut, who... Actually, wait a second, why is this guy not the best cat? This may come off as me being a bit of an ass here, but in a strategy game like the Battle Cats where you need multiple different types of units to come together and each do their own job like pieces in a puzzle, Bahamut often feels like, and especially in this last year, like taking that puzzle and throwing it off the Empire State Building. I mean, seriously, this guy has some of the most absurd damage output in the game, and with that fairly recently introduced explosion talent, Bahamut's damage output gets doubled and has some additional Pierce tagged on with that. On easy stages, Bahamut cripples everything that comes his way like a bowl of spaghetti, and on harder stages, he becomes an extremely valuable asset at dealing massive heaps of damage to some of the bulkiest and toughest enemies that the game can throw at you. Now, I do understand that from a versatility standpoint, Boulder does have more usages, and that makes sense. 99.99% of stages in the Battle Cats will require you to bring meat shielding to at least some degree, and since Boulder is a meat shield, that does make them more usable than rusher units, as there are definitely stages in this game which prevent you from using rushers to any degree. I'll use the Belated Priest again as an example, because it's the first one to come to mind, and also this stage is turbo ass. But just because Boulder is usable on every stage doesn't mean it should be your #1 choice every single time. In the late game, especially where we are now, where we have brutal advents that drop some of the most valuable meat shields in the game that are needed to counter key traits, these meat shields are often the ones that you should be prioritizing in your lineup in order to keep those key enemies at bay. I mean, think about it. This same logic can be applied to other units in different classes too. Just because Can is an attacker which you could be using in every stage doesn't mean it's the most feasible. If you're facing a stage with a gazillion peons, you're not going to want a single target attacker who can only attack one unit at a time. You need stuff with area attack in order to sweep those peons away. And with all these different types of units we're mentioning, there is one other type of cat which needs to be mentioned when we're talking about the best cats in the entire game. And that is Ubers. For the record, I don't think any Uber sits as being the best unit in the entire game, but I'd be lying if I said it didn't get a little close at times. I'm sure you've seen at least one video talking about the best Ubers, whether that's one of xSkull's arguably the best Uber videos, Lucas's video on Dastly, or Canned Juice's video on the Big Three, and I think you can get why these Ubers are so busted if you've seen any video like these. However, for the purposes of this video, I've picked just 2 of the best Ubers because they're the ones that I own on my account and therefore are the ones I'm the most familiar with the first of these 2 being Balrog. Balrog, in many ways, is very easily comparable to Can, a cat with a stupid high amount of attack power and a single target attack, except instead of having double bounty, Balrog trades that in for a faster attack rate and a strengthen which activates once they're on their final knockback. They're incredibly useful for whopping on huge amounts of damage to some of the bulkiest enemies in the game and are great at being a machine which turns Nyandem variants into fine-grated cheese. But they do fall to the same limitations as Can due to that single targeting, as large swarms of peons will render them unable to deal their gigantic damage to the bulky targets in question. However, an Uber which does not have that problem, and the one that I think pushes the debate on best cat the most out of any Uber that I own in the game at the moment, is Supernova Cosmo. If you're familiar with the best Ubers in the game, you know why Cosmo is so broken in his Ultra form. He has a shit ton of range, deals a load of damage, which then gets doubled by the wave that he produces, has an additional freeze which applies to certain traits, and to top all of that off, he gets to the front line of the battle immediately due to him being fast as fuck, boy. All of these abilities, when thrown together, create something which is very similar to Bahamut, throwing that puzzle off the Empire State Building, because he can crack most stages open like an egg, and can destroy some of the hardest stages in the entire game, including Heinous Road. The one major thing holding Cosmo back is his status as an Uber, because getting Cosmo is completely down to the gacha system, which means gambling. But if it wasn't for that, he'd definitely be a contender for sure. So, now what? Now that I've mentioned all these cats and all of these asterisks with Boulder, where does that leave us? Well, it leaves me with something that I need to ask you, the viewer, and your answer to this question I think will help you decide on what prioritizes the best cat in your mind. The question is this: do you think a cat is better when it is more versatile and synergizes well with other units, even though it may have to rely on outside help to make it so good? Or do you think a cat is better when it is able to do so much on its own and break the fundamental balance of the game? If you think the first part of my question is the correct statement, then you're probably more inclined to think that it's a unit like Boulder, which should be nominated for the best cat in the game. And if you think the second part of my question is the correct statement, then you're probably more inclined to think that Bahamut, or maybe even an Uber, is the best cat in the game. Now that I've said that, I want to reiterate again that this video is not to shit on xSkull, nor is it to say that I've solved the debate on who is the best cat in the game, because I don't think I have. But if you want my personal opinion, I think when looking for the best cat in the game, what should be done is to look at the different methodologies that xSkull mentioned in their video, and to find a cat which satisfies both versatility and carry, a cat who is the best of both worlds. And if anything, with everything that I've just said, I should be thanking xSkull for making this video, because without it, I wouldn't have been asking these questions in the first place on what makes the best cat. Again, this is a video that is not meant to solve the debate on who the best cat is, but if you made it through this whole video, I hope you realize how much there is to really deciding who the best cat is, how the criteria may change from person to person, and that this debate will probably go on to the end of time itself. With all of that said, I thank you for watching this video on if Boulder Cat is the best cat, and I hope you enjoyed your time. Now we just have to wait for Boulder Cat to get their true form, cause maybe that will change some things.